The Weight of Silence. Book 1. Song 1. Between Memory and Breath. Order steadied him. The beads remembered. Chapter 1. Reflection in Gold. Morning light crossed a room kept orderly. Everything in its place. The bed was tight, sheets drawn flat, blanket folded at the foot, pillow centered. Shelves held field guides and survival books, sorted by season, then by region. 2 pairs of boots weighted by the wardrobe, cleaned and oiled, laces tucked inside. On the desk, a bound book of his hand-drawn maps lay open under a ribbon marker. Nothing shouted. Everything waited. The mirror's wooden frame was simple. The glass was clear. Jaw, eyes, and shoulders were squared by habit. He held his own gaze and drew stillness from it. Amber eyes in a warm brown face. Youth checked by composure. Beads shone in his dark locks, older ones dulled to old gold, newer ones bright as coins. Each bead marked a promise or an earned standing in the Northwind tradition. You wore only what already belonged to you. Each bead opened with a squeeze and clamped around a lock. The carved motifs let him know each one by touch. One bead would not be ignored. It tugged a single lock forward. His brother's bead, Alaric's. The face held a small compass, the north tick cut deeper, and a tiny rim notch at that point. He had pressed it into Gage's palm the day he left for the front lines. The bead marked Alaric as first in his ranger class. The small carving by the hole caught the light and refused to let go. Northwind's lead. He whispered to the mirror. Northwind was his family name. Service was the family tradition. The words landed without flourish, but with inevitability, the way his father set a task and then simply completed it. Once Martial Protector Northwind gave his word, he would never falter. He checked his bow with the care his brother had taught him. Plain steps, nothing fancy. He ran a fingertip along the bowstring. If it caught, the fibers were lifting. His finger slid clean. He sighted along the wood for hairline cracks and found none. He wiped a speck of grit from the arrow notch so the release would not snag and send a shot wide. He slid a palm along the satchel strap and rolled his shoulder until the leather lay flat, quiet. His hand strayed to his pocket and went still there. Not today. He would not contemplate the leadership bead. His father had commissioned it for his military leadership vow. It was meant to be fastened to a lock upon accepting the call to lead that all Northwinds heeded. He kept it in his pocket until the promise belonged to him, not his surname. Carried, not worn. As he passed the hallway table, he set a smooth river stone from the table's edge onto his father's to-do list, flattening the curling parchment. Martial Protector Theron Northwind, his father, began each day before sunrise, and the missing boots by the entryway confirmed he was already tending to some military matter. He stepped into the kitchen. There, Lyra Northwind, his mother, stood at the basin, sleeves rolled, washing dishes. Her face was calm in the morning light. She moved with a pensive quiet, the kind that comes when someone you love is far from home. Without a word, he walked to her side and dried the dishes she had set aside. They worked in warm silence, and when the task was complete, his mother tied off a parcel of bread, dried meat, fruit, and cheese, and pressed it into his hands. She touched her heart and kissed his cheek. No speech, only a look that held pride and worry wound tight. He looked into her amber eyes, his eyes, and touched his heart with his hand in answer. An east wind. He let it stroke his cheek. Leaves along the lane leaned and held in a small tilt. The air felt damp, no rain yet, but a promise of it. No one else looked up to read any of it. A woman dumped a basin with a hard splash. A boy thumped a bucket down and pretended not to feel the water strike his boots. Habit would serve them. He carried different habits. He made a mental map wherever he stood. Alaric's bead tugged the lock forward again. Gage resisted the reflex to tuck it back. The world would see what it chose to see. Some days the bead read as pride. Some days grief. Today it reads as an instruction. Watch everything, not just your feet. His brother's voice lived in that sentence the way a river held its line, even when banks changed. He took the route toward the ridge. Meridian Academy stood beyond the square just before the forest. with low buildings gathered around an open yard. Students would be preparing for the work ahead. He pictured aspiring clerics sorting clean bandages and fighters rubbing blades to a morning shine. From the square, the cobbles toward the academy ran smooth. Students' boots polishing the stones inside deeper ruts caused by cartwheels tracing a steady path. If he timed his steps, he could slip through the traffic without stepping into anyone's second thought. He ran the day's first count of his beads. Just touch and mental tally. Old pledge to carry his share. A pledge to keep his speech clean of lies. A promise to leave each place better than he'd found it. Range discipline was the academy's standard for safety, lane etiquette, and clean execution on the call. Endurance drill meant holding form and accuracy over long sets. Promises kept and achievements earned. "Ah, crow's luck," someone muttered as a cart axle squealed through the square. The axle sounded dry, not cracked, Gage noted, and he set aside the urge to step in. Not his work. Not this moment. Before the ridge flattened, he stood a moment and let the morning settle. The east wind plucked at the bowstring where the bow rode his shoulder. The sparrows had finished their argument and lined the gutter in an uneasy peace. Leaves trembled, less decidedly east now. The direction would swing by midday. He would have preferred to reach the yard early and take the measure of the targets before anyone else. The home ritual had cost him some of that time, but it was not wasted. Order at home was a kind of peace too. Back home, his father's to-do list would lie flat beneath the smooth river stone, so the parchment would not curl. The parcel in his hand meant his mother had thought of his hunger before he had. A quiet house meant a steady start. At the gate he paused, not long, only the heartbeat that turned a habit into a choice. He set his shoulders so the bow rode right. He reached up and drew a Laerarix bead forward until it touched his cheek, a promise to pay attention. "I'll keep it visible," he murmured. The wind kept the words for him. The academy yard opened plain as a map, straw targets in a careful line, packed earth lanes between them, stone paths around the edges worn by 1,000 turns. By the range door, a chalkboard waited. It marked attendance and set lane order for morning drills. He pictured the neat line he would draw, clear enough to read, strong enough not to smudge. He stepped through the gate and did not look back. He had left the house in order. He had brought the important weight with him. The unworn bead could stay where it was, carried, not worn, until it belonged. Chapter 2. The south yard's rhythm bowstrings sang in brief, dry notes, then stilled. Morning light moved along the packed earth lanes in thin bands. The targets wore rings of straw and old paint, their centers darkened by practice. Stone paths framed the yard. Instructors spoke in low, steady voices. Their orders drifted across the yard and settled. Gage signed the chalkboard by the door, the academy's roll for morning drills. Students wrote their names in order, and that order set their lanes. No shouting names and no lists, just a quiet sign-in and line-up. He stepped to the line. Breathe in, slow. Breathe out, steady. He read the yard the way he read a map, the way the dust lifted and fell, the way the leaves on the training elm held a slant, the way a loose strap on a neighbor's quiver tapped a faint rhythm. East wind, shallow. The ground at the line was lightly damp, grippy at first, then slippery. "Loose when ready," called Ranger Captain Hale. The voice reached without pushing. "Keep your sights true. Don't hurry to miss." A first-year stepped into the lane 2 places down and froze. Their shoulders were set too high, and their elbows were impossibly tight. The arrow scraped on the bowstring and made a dry panic sound. Gage clocked the freeze and returned to his setup. The first year's arrow still wasn't set on the bowstring. Knowing he would not be able to focus on his shot until he helped the student, Gage lowered his own bow and walked the 2 lanes like a man crossing a narrow stream. Up close, the first year's hands were not only trembling, they were trying not to be seen trembling. Their lips had the shape of someone reforming the same apology over and over. "Hold this," Gage said, "not sharp, not soft." He pressed a small gold bead at his temple to open its clamp, freed it from his lock, and set it in the first year's palm. Each gold bead marked a promise kept or a milestone earned. The carved symbol told him which by touch. The carving on this one formed the 7-ring curl, the Academy's mark for first place in forms. In the Northwind lines, a bead could be a brace. You used it where a shake began. Steady yourself with it. Put your thumb across the circle and just breathe. 3 in, 3 out. Do not force it. The air will come on its own. The first year blinked down at the bead, surprised that something so small could feel so heavy with meaning. The first year stammered. Don't talk, Gage said, and the corner of his mouth softened so the words wouldn't bruise. The bead moved under their thumb, once, twice, 3 times. Gage waited for the first year, the way you wait for a skittish animal to decide you mean no harm. The first year's shoulders dropped a finger's width. Their mouth relaxed. The bead moved under their thumb, once, twice, 3 times. Set the arrow, Gage said, then look past it. The target won't move, but the wind will. See the elm? He nodded toward the training tree at the edge of the yard. Its leaves lean a little right. Set your aim a little left to balance it out. Not much. A hair. Still collecting strays? Came a voice across the lanes. Serendipity Starfall. Better known as Dip. Gage didn't have to look to know it was him. He looked anyway and met his childhood friend's storm gray eyes. They shone, as always, half amused, half earnest. Dip lifted a hand in an easy salute. I would have done the same, Dip added, stepping into the neighboring lane. But you got there first, and I enjoy my reputation for laziness. Your reputation is safe, Gage said. Dip grinned. Tragic, he declared, as dramatically as ever. He set an arrow to his string, then whispered softer, for the first year's benefit. He's better at this than he looks, which is unfair because he already looks very good at this. The first year's mouth twitched toward a smile. The bead moved under their thumb. 3 in, 3 out. Northwind, Ranger Captain Hale called. Read the air. Gage turned his head and let the yard speak to him. East wind crossing the lanes, he said. Light. The line is slippery in places. He glanced at the center target, 3rd from the left. The frame tilts a little, hard to see. But it will pull shots low if you aim dead center. Aim a finger's width higher. A few students traded the kind of looks that said they had felt a slip in their aim and now had words for it. Hale's chin dipped. Neither praise nor correction, just permission to proceed. Gage returned his attention to the first year. Set your feet, not wide and not narrow. Let your bones hold you up so your muscles don't have to work alone. He nudged a toe with his own boot until the angle matched the first year's shape. There, that's your stance. This time, the notch clicked onto their bowstring cleanly. The first year drew an easy, unforced breath. Gage stepped back 1 pace so the first year's body would have space to decide it could do the rest. Loose when ready, Hale said again. With Gage beside them, the sane words found the first year ready. Their fingers opened. The air took the arrow and carried it in a small curve, as if the wind had put a hand under it and then let go. It struck a bit left of center with the sound of straw accepting the thud. And range stayed quiet for a blink too long. Then Dip cheered once, and it broke into a short laugh. Gage let himself nod and then became still again. The first year stood very straight and very still, then looked at the bead in their palm as if it had made a miraculous thing. They held it out to Gage in reverence. Keep it until the end of drills, Gage said. Count if you start to lose your breath. Bring it back when your breath holds steady. The first year closed their fingers around the bead as though it were the most precious thing. Thank you, they said. Gage went back to his lane. He set his arrow, checked his feet, saw the elms lean in the corner of his eye, and lifted his aim a breath to the left, a hair high for the target's crooked posture. He let the string carry his fingers away, and watched the arrow's small curve meet the painted ring with an honest thud in the center of the target. Show off, Dip said, but like a boy admiring a clean knot. Your turn, Gage said. Dip's first arrow landed close to Gage's, then a little closer, then wide one time because he tried too hard and started to grin at himself. "The target and I have agreed to meet in the middle," he said. "We are both running late." "Breathe," Gage said, which made Dip laugh. He took a breath and noticed a slight lift at the edge of Gage's mouth. Hale moved along the line, the sort of walking that steers a group without the group noticing the steering. "Mind your feet," Hale told one. "Your heel keeps drifting toward a groove in the ground and could snag." To another, "Lift your aim an inch, the frame sags." He paused near Gage and the first year, who had reset and loosed a second arrow within the paint, and watched without commentary. Hale had a talent for silence that was not a threat, but a path. After a handful of shots, Gage settled his bow on his shoulder by the carry strap and stepped off the lane. He walked to the edge of the yard once more, noting where a stone jutted above the packed ground and where dust had turned slippery. If he had chalk, he would have marked those spots so others would not slip or aim low. He made a note to bring chalk next time. A bell on the far building gave a single polite tone, an invitation to switch partners or lanes, not a command. Gage came back to the first year, who was steadying their feet as if the prince could tell them what they'd done right. They held out the bead again. They stopped themselves and tried again. "I could breathe that time." "You could," Gage said. He took the bead and turned it once in his fingers, then set it back in the first year's hand. The bead carried the 7-ring curl, the Academy's carving for first place in forms. He had 3 of them now, one earned each year at Meridian. "Keep the count, breathe, and your hands will find their place." The first year nodded, the quick kind that means the body is making room for a truth without yet knowing where to put it. "Name?" Gage asked, out of habit. The first year hesitated, not out of rudeness, but because anxiety seemed to sweep their name away. I can't," they said, and then looked utterly embarrassed by the response. "No worries," Gage said. He didn't press. There was no rush. They could do names another time. Dip leaned an elbow on Gage's shoulder without actually leaning any weight. "Your line of admirers grows," he murmured. "Soon you'll need a steward to handle bead loans and schedules." "I'll put you in charge of schedules," Gage said. "Disaster," Dip said cheerfully. And then, in a lower voice, "Good work." Hale's shadow fell across the 3 of them. "Northwind," he said, which in Hale's mouth could be a call or a query or a warning, but was none of those now. "You see the yard as it is. Keep doing that. Starfall, stop trying to impress the target with charm. Targets are notoriously cold." "Tragic," Dip said again. Hale's gaze rested for a heartbeat on the first year. "Count if you shake," he said, as if the bead in their pocket were a known thing. "Nothing wrong with shaking. Only thing wrong is quitting." "Yes, Ranger Captain," they said, standing straighter but not so straight they'd topple. Hale's gaze flicked to the bead and away. He had seen Northwind's lend steadiness before. Hale moved on. Gage watched the line adjust. Small things. A foot drawn back, a chin unhooked from pride, a frown softened into concentration. He felt the brush on his cheek as Alaric's bead drifted forward again. He let it rest there. Northwind's lead, he thought, without saying it out loud, because saying it out loud wasn't the point. The sun found a gap in the clouds and shed brightness along the targets. Birds made new decisions at the edge of the yard. The east wind was still there, but less certain of itself. The wind would change again by midday. He kept that too. "Another round?" Dip asked. "Another," Gage said. He took his lane, and the first year took theirs, with a steadier set to their mouth. The yard breathed with them. In, out, count, release. Arrows found straw with the sound of work accepted. The morning built itself one small decision at a time. No ceremony, no speeches, just the weight of things carried where they mattered, seen or unseen. When the bell gave its second tone, the first year stepped over and held out the bead a final time. "It helped," they said simply. "Use it to steady your breathing," Gage said. They closed their fingers, then reopened them. "Thank you." Gage clicked the bead's clamp closed in his hair, the motion small and practiced. Dip watched, expression turned quiet for a blink, then shook it off and bumped Gage with a shoulder. "Lunch?" he asked. "You have a parcel, surely prepared by a saint, of bread and cheese to delight in." "My mother is the saint. She prepared enough for us both," Gage said. "Then I will praise her by eating my portion and only half of yours," Dip said, already walking. Gage followed. The map of the yard sat neatly in his head. The gold bead at his temple felt warm. The unworn bead in his pocket sat heavy as ever, exactly where it belonged. He didn't have to look to know the first year would walk straighter the rest of the morning. Some weights you alone must carry, some you can lend. Both teach the same lesson. Breathe steadily. Chapter 3, Reading the Forest. With morning drills coming to a close, the yard eased into a quiet hum. Students gathered in small groups and instructors retreated to cooler areas to take their breaks. Closer to the tree line, a little way from the range, Gage leaned against an elm tree. He rested his bow against the elm and sat. With his eyes closed, he listened to the leaves rustle. Dip was late to lunch, as usual. As Gage waited, he noticed the sounds thin out, and memory took him. He could smell the forest and feel the damp ground. He was smaller. The world was larger. Alaryric's frame was a shoreline ahead of him, placing each step so the moss sprang back without showing he'd been there. Gage's breath came louder than it should. He tried to hold it in his teeth and only made it stranger. "Shadow," Alaryric said without turning, voice easy, like offering a hand. "Watch everything, not just your feet." Gage looked up, and the forest introduced itself again, this time properly. A branch still damp from last night leaned into others and shed a drop that fell with a small, exact sound. Ants worked a seam in a rotting log and flowed around a leaf as if the leaf didn't exist. The light had boundaries he could see now. Wide bars between trunks, narrower stripes where the understory pinched it to threads. The wind went one way at the ground and another higher up, a double stream you had to choose between. He tried to put his steps in the places Alaric had left. His boot hesitated over a patch of dark mulch, and then found firmer ground just to the side. A twig cracked anyway, too loud. He winced. Alaric lifted a hand, the patient kind of signal that was not a scold. He let the forest swallow the crack, like a river swallowing a stone. "Don't force it," Alaric said. "Let the world tell you." Gage breathed and let the sounds sort themselves by size and distance. A jay scolded 2 gullies away. Something heavier than a fox, but lighter than a boar, shifted brush upslope, and then decided to be elsewhere. The soil smelled of a brief rain. The shirt under his vest stuck between his shoulder blades. He fought the urge to tug it free. The fight made more noise in his body than the tug would have. Alaric looked back over his shoulder. His grin said he liked Gage's work, even when it was not pretty. "Better," he said. "Don't stare at better. Keep going." They moved. The world moved with them. A bent blade of grass still shone, a fresh track. A snapped fern pointed the way. Shallow angle, fast. Alaric touched it with one finger and left it the way he found it. "Signs don't beg to be held," he said. "They beg to be read." Gage nodded and tried to make his nod smaller. His legs learned where to step. He set his foot, lifted, set again. The third choice made less sound than the first 2. Alaric stepped easily, as if the forest had made a map for him alone. Frustration pricked at Gage, quick and thin. He was always a half-second behind, the breath after, the pressure after, the line after. He wanted to be where Alaric was, to see it all at once. "You're thinking too loud," Alaric said, and the laugh in it softened the edges. "Thoughts are useful. Loud thoughts scare rabbits." "Rabbits should be braver," Gage muttered, and Alaric's grin flashed again. They came to a shallow dip where water had run itself thin and gone to ground. Alaric stopped and bent, not to touch the earth, but to put his face near it. the way you lean toward a whisper. "Here," he said, and Gage knelt beside him. In the silt, a pair of prints had almost convinced themselves they were not prints, just softer places, edges already blurring. Alaric pointed. "See how the heel isn't a heel? That's a toe," he said. "Cloven, too. Small. Doe and a young one, not a buck, came through at dawn." He put the tip of his finger just above the mark, not on it. "She walked carefully. Something spooked her yesterday." "How do you know yesterday?" Gage asked, relieved to be able to ask a question he wasn't ashamed of. Alaric angled his head toward the bramble on the dip's far side. A thorny spray along the path lay crushed, then lifted, then crushed again. "3 passes in 2 days," he said. "None today. She's trying a new way around it." Gage nodded, and this time he wasn't pretending. The world was a book with pages that didn't turn unless you held them right at the corners. "Footing," Alaric said softly, and Gage realized he had gone back to watching only the prints. He widened his eyes to the edges again and saw the place where the bank's loose stones wanted to announce him. He set his feet where the soil was damp and quiet instead. Alaric's hand came down to ruffle his hair, then stopped, then leant to his shoulder and pressed once. They crossed the dry run, went up the far side through a tangle of brush that grabbed at them. Alaric took the punishment where it made the least noise. Gage followed and learned something about what pain was worth and what it wasn't. A small falcon cried somewhere above the canopy, and the sound slid between the trunks the way sunlight did. Alaric's head tilted to listen. "Hunting," he said. "If the falcon does not move from that perch, we will find feathers under it later." "You always know," Gage said, and wished he hadn't said it. Alaric stopped then. The forest went quiet around a small clearing. He turned and looked at Gage full on, not over a shoulder, not with half a grin. "I don't," he said. "I know how to pay attention. That's different." Gage tried to stand taller and only succeeded in looking like he was trying to stand taller. Heat crawled up his neck. "Shadow," Alaric said again, gentler. "Being behind me isn't a judgment. It's a position. Positions change. You'll take point soon enough, and I'll get to be lazy and pretend it was my plan to let you." He leaned in so the words didn't travel far. "Northwind's lead. We just take turns." The words set something straight in Gage. He let out a breath he had not meant to hold. "Then let me try," he said, before he could think himself out of it. Alaric's eyebrows made a small approving shape. "Take us to the birch that looks like it wants to be 2 birches. It's here and it isn't far. You saw it when we came in." Gage closed his mouth on the urge to say he hadn't exactly. He turned and looked not for birch bark, but for the way the light had been cut earlier, the way pale trunks had stacked by 3s and then broken their pattern just once. He found the gap like a missing tooth and angled toward it. He went slower than he wanted to. He put his feet down as if someone else might have to walk on his prints later. Twice he chose wrong and hurt it in his boot. He adjusted before the sound finished. Once he lifted his foot and put it somewhere it hadn't thought to go. He did not look back to see if Alaric approved. He let the forest say yes or no. The birch waited where it had promised to wait, one trunk that split low, 2 white arms lifting side by side as if in agreement. He arrived and felt more like he had been allowed there than like he had claimed anything. "Good," Alaric said behind him, the words straight, without sugar. "Now tell me 3 things you know and 3 things you don't." Gage looked and said what the world admitted. East wind at the ground, west higher up. Doe came through before light with a fawn. She's avoiding the bramble. He faltered, then pushed on. "I don't know if something is following her. I don't know if that small falcon will get her meal. I don't know." He stopped, surprised at himself. "I do not know if I am being careful or just slow." Alaric's hand found his shoulder again. "Careful is slow until it isn't," he said. "Then it's the only speed that matters." He pointed up to a dead branch thin enough to snap with the weight of a sparrow. "That falls in the next wind. Don't stand under it when it does." He pointed down to a patch where the ground showed dark and wet. "That holds water even when it's pretending not to. Don't step there if you're trying to keep your feet quiet. Everything else, you're reading just fine." Gage nodded, and this time the nod fit. They stood a moment and let the world come back to being noisy. The small falcon called again. Somewhere, a twig popped without needing either of them to cause it. The sun stole a little more distance through the branches. "Shadow, you are doing it. You just do not know you are doing it yet." He reached and ruffled Gage's hair anyway this time, quick and rough, then tugged one of Gage's beads forward so it touched his cheek. "Keep this visible. Not for me, for you." Gage lifted a hand and touched the bead after Alaric let it go. "It's heavy," he said, and immediately wished he'd kept that thought inside. "Good," Alaric said. "Weight tells you what matters. If it doesn't weigh anything, you'll forget to carry it." They found the path out of the trees by walking toward where the ground smelled more like dust than loam. When the forest let go, the light widened and the town came back into view, familiar angles. Alaric's stride lengthened without hurrying. Gage had to add a half step every now and then to keep the distance from growing. At the edge of the square, Alaric stopped, turned, and set his palm briefly against Gage's chest. Not hard enough to push him, just firm enough to mark the moment. "You'll always catch up," he said. "That's your trick." Gage swallowed a grin and tried a serious nod that fooled no one. "Northwind's lead," he said, because he wanted to say it where Alaric could hear it. "Northwind's lead," Alaric echoed, then ruined the ceremony by flicking Gage's ear and taking off at a run. Gage chased him, laughing, then remembered to watch the cobbles for the dark patches that only looked dry. He placed his feet where the ground wouldn't tell on him. He didn't catch Alaric. That wasn't the point. The present took him back. The bell at the academy gave a single note, polite and impossible to ignore. The leaves of the elm rustled again. He opened his eyes. A doe slipped back into the trees at the yard's edge. He held still until the leaves settled. Dip's voice sounded from somewhere to his right. "You look like you remembered a joke and forgot the punchline." "Something like that," Gage said as he pushed off the elm and set his bow where it belonged on his shoulder. Alaric's bead had crept forward and rested against his cheek. He let the circular bead's deeper north mark sit visible. Northwind's lead. The day went on. Northwind's lead, but they take turns. The songs are only beginning. Add your voice. Like, comment, and subscribe, and walk with us as new threads are woven. The tapestry grows with every listener who joins it.